Our next speaker is a passionate agri-innovator. He has a love for agriculture that stems from endless summers spent with his grandparents on their farm north of Coaldale. Ken Cole's career in agriculture expands 25 years of agriculture research, extension in private industry, government, and most recently with a nonprofit charity, Farming Smarter. Ken has built Farming Smarter into a world-class agricultural innovation hub. Today, Ken shares with us his 2022 Nuffield experience studying agriculture, innovation around the globe, and will draw the parallels in identifying challenges, opportunities, and potential solutions for Canadian farmers. Please help me give a warm welcome to Ken.
Hello, everybody. How's things? I gotta do one thing before we start. Hi, Morton. Anyways, I'm gonna try not to seem like your old uncle going on a bit of a slideshow approach, but this is exactly what I want to do. I have a whole bunch of pictures from around the world. I'm quite fortunate to have been supported and selected as a 2022 Nuffield Scholar. Yes. And unlike the chairman, I actually wore my Nuffield tie. So I don't like wearing ties or suits for that matter, but I'm taking the role of a Nuffield Scholar quite seriously so I don't get in trouble. Anyways, I wanted to thank Farming Smarter and the Alberta Wheat Commission as sponsors for my scholarship. And what that is it's 10 weeks of travel around the world on a study topic. And on a whim, I applied for this application, or for this scholarship, kind of midlife crisis type approach as well, banging my head against the wall trying to run this nonprofit organization, hoping that maybe I might learn something and glean some ideas from around the world and also help develop myself. Believe it or not, I actually don't like traveling. So a lot of people are quite envious of the opportunities. Half the time I'd rather be at home or maybe fishing like you. So I'm starting to like it though. It's growing on me. I've had some pretty amazing experiences. So for my trip, I'm gonna take you follow some of the key highlights that I've experienced across a number of countries. I started off at the United Kingdom, and we had our what's called a Contemporary Scholars Conference with 142 scholars put together for 2 years, thanks to COVID slowing things up. So that was quite an experience. After that, I went for a week in Ireland. I did a week in France. And after that, I managed to, by chance, go to Zimbabwe. That wasn't really planned, but the trip popped up, and it was actually the highlight of my experience so far. I did a trip to Southern Ontario, and I did not visit Blake. Didn't have enough time, but I managed to go to Vineland, which is an organization that I wanted to see. My study topic is really about organizations that help farmers to innovate, and I wanted to sort of focus on that. So that was a really good experience. My very last trip is coming up this March in New Zealand, so you only get 110 slides instead of 150. So for those of you who are confused by what the United Kingdom is, and Great Britain and England and all the different names, it constitutes Scotland in the north, and we've got England along the south, and Wales is in the east. Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom. The rest of Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, is actually its own country, and you don't make that mistake of mixing them up with UK. Trust me. So I started off in Scotland, and it was a short amount of time, but I managed to get to visit my kindred spirit. My first interview with somebody from Innovative Farmers. And right before that, I did a trip up to the Stirling Castle. So this is where Robert the Bruce and William Wallace and all of that fun stuff happened. And on the tour, the reason I'm bringing this one up is they actually toured the kitchen and the galley, and they talked about how important it was, even in the 1500s, 1600s, to bring foods from around the world. So in royalty, having that exchange of food and spices was a big deal. So the global trade of food has been going on for a very long time, and it's nothing new. So it was a rainy day, and I was still recovering from my jet lag, and I decided to check out a museum. Does anybody recognize this Dolly, it is. It's Dolly the lamb or Dolly the sheep. So for those of you that are too young, which is most of you here, Jurassic Park came out in around 1993, and then a few years later we heard the first cloned animal was Dolly. And so the realities of what we can do in science was there, but it was also quite scary. Funny thing about Dolly is she was there, but she was also rotating, and it was like all on display. And it happened there in Edinburgh in Scotland. Does anyone know how Dolly got its name? I heard the answer, and you're right. So Dolly was made from a cell from a mammary gland. So at the time, this is where stem cell research came in. Dolly was the most famous mammaries out there, so they actually named the sheep Dolly. Now you know the things you learn in a museum, right? But when you think about innovation, like that's one of those things. It led to a lot of breakthroughs in stem cell research and what we can do, and it was sort of a neat way to start off the trip. So Anna here, they have an organization called Innovative Farmers, and it's really about that on-farm research, that practical research. And it's actually a sexy thing there. They're getting funding for it. They had their 10-year anniversary, but it's again kind of what Blake is talking about too, is that we can focus in on science, but if it doesn't make it to the farm and it's not solving farmers' actual problems and challenges, then what's the use? So this is a really good example of an organization that has actually been successful in getting public support and funding support to do that practical on-farm research. Now, I was actually, noticing that maybe the rigor of the work that they were doing could improve, but I think one of the real benefits is that, local people could deal with the issues that mattered to them. And that's an important concept as we think about investing in agricultural research and innovation. The term innovation actually means to add value, and if it doesn't add value to the farm, then it's just research. So I had a good chat with her, and at the end of each country, I'm going to show you which slide's showing right now. So talking about fear, everybody's heard of haggis? I was pretty nervous about this haggis idea. It's like intestines and all this other stuff. Holy crap, it's good though. I ate it 3 times and I was only there for 2 days. So don't be afraid to try new things. There's my haggis, neeps, and tatties. That's a very classic Scottish. It's basically shepherd's pie, but it's really good. So then I wandered down into England, and this is where our Contemporary Scholars Conference started. And we were in sort of that, to the top right, there's a little bulb there, that's Norfolk, and we were in Norwich. And met with so many people, we were exposed to a lot of presentations, and this is where, getting outside of your comfort zone is a good thing, because I tend to like to focus in Southern Alberta, what's real, what's relevant to me. But when you go out there and you experience agriculture in a different light, it really opens up your eyes to, what other people are facing and how all the different components really play. And probably the biggest theme for me was the ag policies in Europe with the European Commission, as well as, we were right there right when Brexit was happening. So, farmers, if you watch Jeremy Clarkson, farmers are actually upset that the Brexit departure because they're losing a lot of subsidies. But it's a highly subsidized environment. And whether it's incentivized or not, it's playing incredible influences on agriculture that aren't always necessarily good. In fact, farmers, their revenue was about 50% from these policies, from these subsidies. They call them schemes. And so you think about that, whether it's a positive thing or not, when half of your revenue is dependent on what these various schemes are doing, then are you really farming or are you farming policies? So while we were there, the Ukraine war was going on. We've got Brexit going on, where they were actually being faced with a catastrophe as far as their agricultural policies were concerned. One of the things I noticed when I was there, and just brought it up, we toured this one spot, and here we're talking about Coleman mustard, and it's all Canadian mustard. We like to talk about value added as the next push, but then I think, it's great. We're the best at growing mustard, are we the best at turning it into mustard and marketing it to a huge environment? So, this is where, again, think about our policies. Right now, all of our investments are going towards value-added development, and it's great if you're an MBA and you want to attract investment and think that we can develop our commodities, but, how do we have access to markets like they do in Europe to be able to develop a product into a marketable thing? So I caution, I think where I'm going there is that, we should be focused on making ourselves the best at producing something, and the value added will come. So I mentioned the policies, and this was a slide David Hughes had presented, and we actually just had him present at our digital conference. But the European Commission, some of the things that they're trying to do is this Green Deal. It's very much climate change focused, but they have some targets that they're hoping to hit. 25% of land in organic production. Now, can you imagine doing that here? 50% reduction in pesticides, 50% reduction in antibiotics for animals. They want to do 20% reduction in fertilizer and 10% of land out of production altogether. So this is an odd thing when all you're hearing is we have 9 or 10 billion people to feed, right? So the imbalances that these policies have are not only affecting Europe, but they're now starting to trickle down into Canada. And you've heard probably the 30% reduction in greenhouse gases. This is where this is coming from, because as major influencers in the agricultural economy, they're now trying to force this upon everyone. So then imagine we're in COVID, we've seen logistic issues, we've seen the Ukraine war, and we're literally paying farmers to grow less. And they realize maybe there's something wrong with our policies. So how do you change a policy like that when farmers have become dependent on it? And I think it's a bit of a wake-up call for us, where we are actually very fortunate with the freedoms to operate. So we went on some farm tours, and this is a farm. I thought it was pretty cool. Please keep off the wicket. The wicket? Yeah. That's for cricket, for those of you that don't know. But this is a giant castle. And the feudal system is still well and alive in England. So there's lots of history and lots of hierarchy. So there's actually this guy's an earl. I got to meet an earl. I didn't really know what an earl is, but it's higher than a lord. It's pretty fancy. So this is the Earl of Leicester. It's kind of like trying to pronounce Worcestershire sauce. Like, who can do that? Anyways, so I managed to meet this fella, and he threw up the bowler hat, and he talks about agriculture, but he manages a whole agricultural farm that includes deer and forestry and potatoes and you name it. And what he feels is right is put down onto the farm. So even the people that rent his land. So he's a big environmentalist. So now we're sort of saying, okay, this is how I want you to farm. And that continues very much in England. And funny enough, I talked to the guy, he said, I'm from Lethbridge. And I know somebody from Lethbridge. And he says, he worked at Suffield in the military, and he was in Lethbridge, and he got to know Tyler Martineau. I'm like, oh, damn, that guy's marketing is good. So small world, hey? I met an earl. Who knows Tyler Martineau? This fella's a lord. And I just went up to him and said, hey, I've never had my picture with a lord. Do you mind? So I didn't really talk to the guy. I just got my picture taken. And he's from Houghton Estates, and his name is Lord Cholmondeley. Turns out he's the dude that carries the crown for the queen. So I thought that was pretty impressive. Whatever. He also manages a 5,000-acre farm around an estate. So that sort of estate approach to agriculture is there, and all of these guys are in the House of Lords, which is like our Senate, and they're in there from birthright. You don't have to get elected. You're continually in the House of Lords. So think of the political influence that these folks have. And then I bumped into this guy. Anybody recognize him? Yeah, Ralph Goodale. He's the High Commissioner to Canada, so it's like the ambassador. And that was at Westminster in the palace there. And I managed to meet one more person. I had a distant relative that reached out to us, and it's this fella here. Some of you may recognize him. Apparently, he's quite famous in Europe. I didn't know who he was, except that he was a distant cousin. And so he has a little farm on the side too. So he gets to play with the animals, and he's a millionaire. He's a comedian. So I looked it up, and there he is with Rihanna right before the Super Bowl. Oh. So I end up with a nice meal, and I managed to travel through York and in Yorkshire County, and had Sunday brunch, which is a lamb shank and Yorkshire pudding. So it was pretty good. Not as good as a haggis, though. So next trip was off to Ireland, and I had met a number of Irish folks at that conference and said, hey, can I come see you? And this is the one thing about Nuffield that maybe wasn't explained by Blake, but you kind of join a family of crazy agriculturalists around the world, and you just phone them up and say, hey, can I come see you? And they'll put you up in their house, and they'll tour you around. So I managed to meet with a few of them. My first stop, though, was at an organization that is one of the highlights for me, and it was, try to read that one, it's Teagasc. Took me 80 times to get it right, but it's Gaelic, and the language is pretty tough to say. So as we know in agriculture, we've seen this gradual decline of government support for agriculture, and we've seen the demise of research and extension with Alberta government. This is an organization that has everything that we had and more, but it's new. It started in the early 90s, and it's quite an impressive organization. Also, the main research center is on one of those old estates. But as Ireland broke away from the UK, they got rid of all the estates and said, okay, now this is going to be a public research farm. So Teagasc, Stan, he's a director of extension and knowledge transfer. And there's 7 research centers, 7 colleges. They have crop specialists. They have over 50 advisory commissions. So everything within the continuum of ag development, ag innovation is all in one house. And this is a country that is smaller than southern Alberta and is investing 160 million euros a year to ag innovation and ag development, which I found really amazing also in Ireland, where it's 95% dairy. It's almost all grass, and this is just for crop production. So I met with a scientist, John Spink, and funny enough, he's from England, and he absolutely hated the environment and research for England, so he moved to Ireland. And they were free to do more work and development and help advancing agriculture rather than that path of policy-forced environmental approaches. I also found it quite interesting that in Ireland, what do you think of Ireland? What do they grow? What do we used to grow? Potatoes? They grow no potatoes, almost none, yet they have a potato breeder. So potatoes used to be a big crop in Ireland, they're not anymore. But their breeding program is now serving and selling to other countries around the world. So they've sort of adapted their science in a different approach. One of the weirdest things for me, having grown up throughout the whole zero tillage movement, was in tremendous reliance on the plow. And that was throughout France and everywhere that I went. The tillage that goes on in Europe is absolutely insane. For me, it was a shock. I've never seen a plow run before. But they get 20 feet of rain a year in some spots in Ireland. So for them, the response was, we're trying to dry it out so we can seed. So it's different environments. They love it so much they bolt rototillers in front of their seeders as well. So it's just completely different. But there's this challenge of, is tillage more environmentally damaging than pesticides? So they're not allowed to use Roundup in some places. So tillage is still sort of required in some regards until they come up with a better system. And I just thought this was funny because plot combines have to have license plates on them in Ireland. I managed to hit my first Nuffield Scholar visit. This guy was amazing. He had a house. He was going to go away for the weekend. He just gave me the keys to his house. Said, hey, stay, make this your home base, and you can tour around Ireland and do what you want. And I was like, that's the type of community that Nuffield is, and it's just absolutely overwhelming to have that sort of gratitude. And on top of that, all of these people that you get to meet, they come and visit you. So I was also able to host 3 or 4 scholars this summer. I've got some more coming this year. So they bring the world to me, And then I tour them around and get to see my world through their eyes. And it's just been a wonderful experience. So this is actually Julian, who is an innovator, and what Nuffield did was give him the courage to go out and do what he wanted to do on his farm as well. And he started growing carrots and direct marketing to the grocery stores. So you'll see his products all over Ireland, and he's just a young fella and has done an amazing thing in a short amount of time. He has I've never seen a crop of daffodils before, so that was pretty neat. That's how the farm started. And these actually got going a little bit too far because they usually pick them before they flower. But anyways, makes for nice pictures. Went for a walk. Morton, our cameraman, is from Ireland, and he was telling me all the things to see. So managed to see definitely a lot of castles. This is one of the oldest ones, around 1100. And just going for a nice walk in the sunset. And one of the things Morton said they have to do is check out a hurling match. Hurling is a sport that is only in Ireland, and it's kind of crazy. But I managed to find a group of kids that had a pickup game of hurling going on, and I got to check it out. So they've got like this wooden spoon and a bat, and they just whack it around at each other. So it's pretty fun. After that, I went out and I stopped and visited Ray O'Foglu. There's an Irish name for you. And he's what I'd describe as a tree-hugging, surfing hippie. And that's really what he is. They actually surf off the cliffs of Galway. And what was really amazing, and you think of a country like Ireland that's been around for so long, they've only got about 2% of their land that's untouched. So coming from Canada, where we're used to like national parks and forests, the only 2% of land that is still sort of in native trees and forests is the really steep ravines that nobody could do anything with. So we got to go on a walk with the ravine, and what he's doing now is his organization Home Tree is working with farmers, trying to increase and reestablish some of that native flora and fauna, and to see his passion walking through there. And it's a nonprofit, so the things that I'm looking for is, how do you pay for things? How do you connect with farmers? And how do you govern and those things? So it was a really good visit. So they're out, growing native trees to go plant on farms, farm edges. And then, like I said, went for a walk in one of these forests, and they're pretty amazing environments. So to see that passion and to understand what they're trying to do and how farmers are actually part of this is really cool. One of my last stops was at a chicken farm. So this is Alex Ivor at Foxbrook Farms, and I like to look like chicken, so I grabbed one for a picture. This is supposed to be a free-range barn, but things happen, right? What's going on right now? We've got this avian influenza, and that's why all of his chickens are in the barn. And I actually worked, right? I'd like to work my keep, and so for half a day I got to pick and sort eggs with his employee from Poland, and that was fun. And same thing, and this is a bit of a theme in a lot of the visits that we've had, is a lot of these guys are trying to get into the whole value chain. So his eggs are going right into the supermarket. I'm not sure if you can see there, but there's a little sticker that says they're barn raised because they're not allowed to be out because of avian influenza. So you have to adapt. And then to end off the meal, I did have Guinness stew with Alex, but forgot to take a picture of it. So instead, I've got some oysters along the coast and some Guinness and Smickwith. I was there for St. Patrick's Day, which surprisingly isn't as big of a thing there as it is here. So it's just a national holiday, and they have a parade. But there's no green beer, and there's no parties or anything like that. But the Smithswick's is the Kilkenny. So I was just off of the Kilkenny Castle. So yes, the Guinness was amazing in Ireland. It isn't the same here. So we're pretty stern folks, but as soon as we have a sip, we're happy. So my next adventure was off to France, and this was a lot of fun. France is the biggest country in Europe, the most agriculturally adept, and this is them working on reduced tillage. How's it look to you guys? And I'm not joking. This is honestly, for them, reduced tillage. So for them, reducing tillage is one less pass of the moldboard plow. So we've got a high-speed Lemkin on the left, and then the finding finisher. So they work the soil into a powder all the time. And coming from this sort of soil background and zero tillage, the European experience was quite shocking, and this is environmentally friendly. This is happy. I managed to be there for sugar beet seeding, so that's just a bit, you kind of see the landscape. They do have larger farm sizes in the north of France, and pretty high value crops like we would under irrigation: potatoes, sugar beets, but no GMOs and almost no glyphosate. So there's a lot of push towards reduction of herbicides and pesticides. The fun thing about going to France was that we've been actually getting exchange students from France. It's part of their educational requirements when they take their ag degrees. So I got to visit some of our former students. This fella actually invited me to his wedding. Couldn't make it, but he got divorced anyway. So, but he's got a nice new girlfriend. So, and his girlfriend actually helped me out on this tour quite a bit. So he manages a farm because land doesn't exchange hands like it does here in Canada. So once you have land, that's what you're stuck with. So all of them over there, they're younger generations trying to figure out, how can I make a living with my dad on no extra land? So they're very eager to expand the value of what they're doing. In this case, the farm's value crop is chicory. And they grow it as a root, they harvest the root, and they put it in a dark room with water, and it grows these little lettuce heads. Again, delivered directly to the marketplace. So very interesting. So I mentioned his girlfriend, and for some reason her name has gone out of my head, but she works for an ag retail in France. And one of the things they do is help support sort of farm peer-to-peer groups. And I got to go on one of these tours with the farmers up in a scary old barn, and they make me speak French to them. And I do speak French, but it's pretty hard when you haven't done it for a year. And they wanted to know everything about what we were doing, and they explained what we were doing, and they go out on a field tour, and they just share what each other are doing on the innovation front. So there was a fair bit of talk of cover crops and soil health, and all this focus on soil health, and you look at the picture on the left, I'm like, really? So anyways, good experience. The group was very interactive and geared to learning, and the day before I had just been at one of the biggest research centers in France, and I asked all of these farmers here, I said, so what are you getting out of all of this research? I said, oh, we have no idea what they're doing. And I don't even know what value they're doing. So a huge disconnect between the scientific community and the farms, which is a growing concern here in Canada as well. So I thought that was quite interesting that, for me, I was like nerding out on research plots, and I can show you them in a minute, but if you don't have that connection and that communication and the piece of actually adapting and adopting on farm, then I don't understand what the point of investing is. So this is just looking at some cover crops and winter wheat coming up and what all the trials that they were doing. I did stop at that university where we have all of our students, and we're actually on board to having 4 more students this year. And so that's kind of exciting because they bring a lot of passion to agriculture. And it's just, like I said, it's great to have different people come and work with our students. And I would really love to encourage that, and I've been talking to our college too, that should be part of the curriculum, is going abroad. So they're retail, and this is look at it, it's more underwear. So this Ferme Pilote is actually an ag retail that started up a research demonstration farm for their clients. And I thought it was really cool because, as you all know, we're all bombarded with millions of different products and practices, and as a retailer, they're testing them because they don't want to be selling products to their clients that don't work. And then they're also doing education on farm practices and soil conservation. So despite the tremendous amount of tillage, they're still doing things like the underwear test, and this is an earthworm test where they're actually marking out a meter squared and pretty much just pouring mustard water on, which makes the earthworms come up. So then we're looking at different tillage systems, and we were rating the soils for soil quality. So there's still a focus on soil quality, but from our perspective, they've got a long ways to go. So this was another student. This guy did make it to his wedding, and they are still married, and they just had their first little girl, so I got to visit them as well. And what, the people part of this is absolutely amazing. Where am I time-wise? Sheesh. So INRE was that big federal-based organization. They have crop commissions as well that were involved, and we got to tour some canola trials, and they have no neonics there, like all of those things that we hear about and stuff. So they're coming up with ways to deal with the challenges that they're faced with. But then, like I said, I go down the road and talk to everybody. Nobody knows about the work that's going on. So Martin, his main farm, again, a young farmer. His dad is not really wanting to stop, so he's trying to diversify his farm. Potatoes are the main value crop there, but in much smaller scale. But they do have a lot more cooperatives going on, so they share equipment. The other high value crop is these miniature bales, which is actually flax. So flax for textile industry. So that's all a farmer-owned co-op where they develop and sell the flax. 5 minutes to do Zimbabwe. I knew I had too many. So Zimbabwe was a trip that just sort of came up to me, and I didn't know anything about it going there, but it was an amazing experience. So it was Rhodesia up until 1980. It was a British colony. And 1980, they had their independence, and most of the British folks left, but they had already been there for 5 to 6 generations. So the farmers stayed, and they continued to farm. But in the year 2000, there was something called land reform. And they took all of the land away from the farmers and split it up into 6-hectare parcels back to the indigenous folks to grow. And it was absolute chaos. So, imagine having your farm for 6 generations taken away from you. So there's been a lot of political corruption. That's the Mugabe government, if you've heard of them. And anyways, it's just been a really interesting history and culture, from also a British colony. Like, we're the same boat. The first stop there was actually at the Alan Savory Institute. So he's sort of the guy that started this holistic grazing management. And it was super interesting. He showed us all the magic that he was doing and then compared it to a national forest here where you can see there's not a lot on the ground except an elephant running after us. But at the same time, you could see that there's a business in what Alan Savory was doing too, right? Like they're selling training. And I think sometimes you have to follow the money. Kind of a bit of an anti-science approach, but somewhere in the middle, I think there's a lot of debate between the two that we have to find the best path. I'm going to skip through a lot of this pig stuff, but you can see there's some of the prices there. Inflation was huge in Zimbabwe. I brought back a $20 trillion bill, so I'm loaded. Yeah, and even now they took 13 zeros off their inflation. They're running two cash markets. One is a U.S. cash without permission, and the other is the Zim dollar, which is about 800 to 1 on the U.S. dollar. So that's why you're getting pork chops and ribs for $8,000. So there's a black market as well, and it's just an interesting environment. But in the last 3 years, they developed this pig industry that's full value chain, including the store that we're in. Nice frozen meat, and then the power goes off. So that's a regular thing that happens in Zimbabwe, is the infrastructure just isn't there. So I mentioned that all the land was taken away, but Zimbabwe used to be the breadbasket of Africa, but this whole divvying up the land and having a little chunk for everybody wasn't working. Most of the people had already been urbanized, and they were starving. So now, about 3 years ago, they allowed people to start building farms. This farm now produces 70% of the pork in all of Zimbabwe in 3 years. They don't own land. They can't get access to capital. They can't get a bank loan. But they still manage to build these amazing ventures, even marketing this. So that's just the feed yard. Everything's in bags. And so that each farm has about 400 employees. So they do have access to really cheap labor. And I think in many regards, it stifles innovation, because I didn't see an auger anywhere, and everything's just bagged and thrown onto trucks. Red Dane Dairy, these guys were doing mobile milking, which was quite innovative, but their main, everything was hand done. They didn't have feed mixers. The main revenue came from a regular barn. But it is a nice example of trying something innovative while you still have sort of your main approach. So managing risk is important. And again, it went all the way to the dairy. So this is just a really high-tech dairy that was amazing there. So that one dairy farmer produced all of the milk for this dairy that produces cheese and ice cream and you name it. This group actually did a nature reserve combined with a tobacco farm. And so all these farms were very diversified in revenue. So this one was really based about, a rhinoceros protection, and people would come and visit them. But tobacco is the main crop, because the tobacco companies will come in and give the capital required to farm. So regardless if it was just for tobacco, they would expense everything based on the tobacco farm. And I thought, we've got some plots, but nope. They were seeded with these little weird watering cans. Everything's done by hand. So that's the tobacco nursery. They take all of those plants and plant them individually by hand in a field with a pivot. So tobacco is the moneymaker, but it's also environmentally damaging because they tend to cut down trees to burn to dry out the tobacco. But their innovation here was starting a macadamia nut farm. And then they toured us around and we got to see elephants and rhinos.
Not sure where we're going with these elephants.
Turns out the big one ate my hat. That's where we were going. So we got to see giraffes and all of the things that you think about. Here's some of the rhinos. And, tourism mixed in with the farm, which is, it's happening around here too. So the question was how destructive the elephants can be, and absolutely they can destroy a lot of things, but in this case they had a 10,000 acre farm. They had all of the animals, including cheetahs, mixed in with cattle. And they did that on purpose because they can dip the cattle to help protect them against insects, whereas you can't dip the wild animals. So they had this sort of integrated animal effect, and they had the right carrying capacity, except for they didn't expect the cheetahs to be quite so voracious. And they're starting to eat too much, kill too much. So, they have these little experiments going on. This farm was a large commercial farm, and this was the biggest tractor I saw, but the climate there was incredible. They do have pivots. This is them liming a field. Again, everything by hand, safety first. The only combine that I saw there, but they were harvesting winter wheat at the time, and they were growing these beautiful potato crops. So we always get this, let's feed the world. These guys have all the capacity to feed themselves and more. Based on the climate they have and the abilities. It's just if they can get through the political strife to make it happen. So they grow two crops in a year. And in this case, they're actually doing it with no rotation. They're going to get themselves into trouble, but man, they can grow potatoes. The reality was the subsistence farming was more like this. This was little corn. You can see harvested corn along the train tracks. So each group would just find a little space and have kind of like a little garden to keep them going. And then you can see in the background here, this is the burning. They do a lot of burning, and that's a lot because of tobacco, and sometimes it's just how they deal with trash. Sometimes they do it to chase out rodents to eat. So it's kind of challenging. I'm going to skip through this one because I've blabbed too long, but I went to a flower farm, a blueberry farm. This guy caught my attention because he's actually profiting from thistles. I thought that was interesting. So thistles and echinacea. Again, tobacco was the main part of their farm to help finance everything, but none of them liked it because the tobacco companies owned them. They were environmentally destructive, and they would try to find ways to improve. So these guys are also growing trees and trying to improve the environment there. The hemp, they can grow cannabis like no other. And again, imagine having 400 employees on your farm, and they all lived on farm. They had schools, they had everything for their employees. This fella actually, the only thing he had is they built their own irrigation dam. So we've got irrigation expansion. These guys just build their own. And so when he lost his farm, he kept this, and this was the only spot where I actually saw hand moves. I expected to see hand moves all over the place, but so he's trying to do regenerative ag cattle production using the irrigation reservoir as his main resource. But again, tobacco. And their innovation here is lemon trees. They just planted lemon trees. I'm sorry, Jamie. I'm almost done. So bananas, paprika, for sun-dried paprika. This was down towards Lake Kariba where they have tremendous irrigation potential. And then we finished off with a little safari. And then some of the food here. So this was kind of fun. Sadsa is a white grain corn that's kind of like potato. I did actually eat the mopani worm there on the bottom right. I almost threw up. But I did try it again with the different spices, and it was a little bit better. But it was absolutely amazing trip. We went with 22 people, and it was an emotional experience to see a third world country, but at the same time, seeing these amazing operations sprout up in 3 years, despite not being able to own land, not being able to get a bank loan, and just go. So the potential there to develop again is absolutely amazing. So I took my 44-hour flight back and went straight to a basketball game in Nuffield. This is what I saw when I arrived home. And then just to sum up, what I take out of this innovation is really about people. It's about courage, determination, being resolute, being adaptive, seeking knowledge and networks like the one we have here today, and finding a way that works, just like these two guys did on the back of that van. So that's what I have to share with you. Thank you for your time. I'm probably not allowed to take any questions.
You can't kick the boss off the stage.
I did warn her.